focus on the blood flowing in your veins, that warm liquid feeding your cells right now. Feel your body heat of 37 degrees. On Earth, everything from the atmosphere you breathe to the soil you step on is flawlessly designed to keep that blood liquid. Now let us break away from this safety in a single move and descend through interplanetary space to the surface of Mars. There, the moment you step on those red sands, the surface pressure is exceptionally low. If a tiny tear opens in your protective suit, that warm blood in your veins evaporates and begins to boil in seconds without needing any external heat. In this video, we will shatter those ruthless physical walls standing against our dream of colonizing Mars. Leave aside those optimistic scenes of growing potatoes in a tent you watched in Hollywood films. We will discover all the facts, from the toxic soil to how the deadly cosmic radiation of the universe destroys our minds step by step. Before moving on to the video, where and what time are you watching this right now? Right below, let's talk. We begin. The very first second you step on those red sands, all those romantic Martian dreams that humanity has built by looking at the sky for thousands of years leave their place to the ruthless laws of thermodynamics. This is not only a place that pushes the limits of technology and engineering, but also an absolute death zone where human physiology has never evolutionarily belonged. What we are facing is not just a distant, silent and desolate planet. It is a physical barrier programmed to destroy us at the cellular level every second we breathe. Behind those optimistic fictions brought by the space race, the cold and insurmountable walls of real scientific data are rising. First, we must look at that suffocating thinness on the surface. That is the atmospheric pressure. The average pressure measured on the Martian surface is at a level of approximately 6.1 millibars. Equivalent to only 6,000ths of the standard pressure you feel at sea level on Earth, this figure represents a critical thermodynamic threshold for our bodies. You can think of this like the water inside a pressure cooker with its lid left open, turning violently into steam not by high heat, but solely through external pressure loss. The Armstrong limit required for the blood and tissue fluids in the human body to boil is 6.3 millibars. If you go out on the surface of Mars unprotected without even needing to freeze, the liquid in your veins instantly begins to evaporate due to the lack of atmospheric pressure. This surprising phenomenon, called ebullism, is the hardest wall in front of colonization engineering. A sealing failure leads to irreversible tissue fragmentation in seconds. But how can this be? Not only the atmospheric pressure, but also the chemical composition contained in that extremely thin air is unconditionally hostile to us. The atmosphere of the planet consists of 95% carbon dioxide, 2.7% nitrogen, and 1.6% argon. Whereas oxygen, our source of life, is at a negligible level such as 1,000th. Inhaling this gas mixture is no different from directly filling your lungs with the exhaust smoke of hundreds of vehicles in a long, airless tunnel during heavy traffic congestion. Leaving no margin of salvation for human respiration, this ratio makes life support systems the most critical technology rather than rocket designs. According to current space medicine standards, you need 0.84 kilograms of pure oxygen a day for a human to survive. This very disproportion, as long as we do not produce our own air on the surface, turns the planet not into a permanent home for civilization, but into a chemical furnace. The atmosphere being this thin and carbon dioxide heavy has another deadly consequence for engineers: massive thermal fluctuations. The average surface temperature of the planet is minus 63 degrees Celsius. However, while the surface temperature rises to plus 20 degrees at noon on a summer day at the equator, the moment the sun sets, it suddenly plummets to minus 70 degrees at night because there is no heat-retaining thermal layer. You can compare this sudden 90-degree drop to throwing a hot glass bowl fresh out of the oven directly into ice water. Just like that glass cracking in seconds, the plastic seals, metal alloys and electronic circuits we land on Mars also carry the risk of fatigue and fragmentation due to this thermal cycle repeated every day. Rather than the cold, engineers have to deal with this daily violent battle of expansion and contraction that wears the material out from the inside. But what is truly bizarre is this. Beyond the environment, there is another silent enemy directly seeping into your bones. The gravitational acceleration of the planet at 3.71 meters per second squared is equal to only 37.8% of the safe gravitational value on Earth. While your body is used to resisting the heavy mass of Earth with every step, this low gravitational pull turns your cellular repair mechanism upside down, just like a tense guitar string loosening and losing all its rhythm. Because your skeletal system cannot transmit that strong mechanical load signal it expects while walking to the cells, it stops calcium production. Evolved according to Earth's conditions, your biological factory considers itself unnecessary in this low-gravity environment and slowly liquefies its bone tissue. This cellular melting state is the heaviest bill the planet issues to our biology directly through its mass. When all these measurable thermodynamic and physical figures come together side by side, Mars appears like a machine operating contrary to our existence. Yet, for decades, the scientific world, astronauts and engineers believed that these conditions could be overcome with heavy technology, and that the surface soil could be much more hospitable for farming in closed habitats. That is, until the advanced rovers landing on the surface sent data to Earth that shattered all our engineering common sense regarding the planet's past. While we thought that soil consisted only of a dry sand field, what invisible secret was the Martian sand hiding against us? That rusty blanket covering the surface acted as an inorganic chemical repository, waiting to tear apart our cellular structure directly. However, before mentioning this structure that collapses colonization plans, it is essential that we focus on an invisible danger raining down incessantly from above and threatening our genetics much more deeply. Because just above the surface, not only thermodynamics but directly the ruthless rules of the nuclear physics begin to operate. The extremely thin atmosphere and lacking magnetic field of Mars not only cannot protect us from violent solar flares, but they also leave us defenseless against the galactic background radiation coming from the dark depths of the universe. The radiation level on the surface has been measured at a daily average of 0.67 millisieverts, solely due to this cosmic radiation, even if there are no regional solar storms. Think of the moment you try to protect yourself by wearing that heavy lead vest while having an X-ray taken at the hospital. Every day you spend on the Martian surface, you have to stand for hours right in the middle of hundreds of X-ray machines left switched on without that protective vest. Consisting of heavy atomic nuclei moving close to the speed of light, these cosmic rays pierce your DNA chains like microscopic bullets by penetrating your cells every 24 hours, and they leave irreparable genetic damage. Moreover, this calculated figure does not even include the deadly solar storms that could suddenly strike the planet. This nuclear downpour raining incessantly on the surface takes the idea of establishing a safe civilization on another planet from being an optimistic adventure and turns it into a deadly radiology laboratory that tests the endurance of human genetics. Besides physical dangers, there is an insurmountable telecommunication abyss created by the speed of light in front of the bond we will establish with Earth. Due to the orbital mechanics of the planets, even at the position where the two planets are closest to each other in space, it takes exactly 3 minutes for a one-way signal to reach Earth. At the furthest position where we are on two opposite sides of the Sun, this period of silence goes up to 22 minutes. You can compare this situation to playing a timed and fast-paced chess match by sending letters through the post. You make your critical move, but you have to wait at the table for a painful amount of time for the other side to see this and respond. If an astronaut suffers an emergency medical crisis at that moment, or the engine of a landing rocket misfires, it will take a total of 44 minutes for the engineers on Earth to see the situation on the screen and send a rescue command. So, this mind-boggling limit set by the speed of light makes it physically impossible to manage missions instantaneously from a control center on Earth, and it makes it mandatory to transfer the decision-making authority directly to autonomous artificial intelligence systems. So how many physical resources does it require to survive for a long time in this environment of absolute isolation? According to the current basal metabolism standards determined by space medicine, the daily life consumption of a single human in space creates a burden that is difficult to calculate. To survive in just one day, an astronaut needs an average of 2,500 to 3,000 kilocalories of food and 3 kilograms of clean water. When you think of the transit flights lasting 6 to 9 months and the long-term missions on the surface, you encounter a mass calculation that shatters the limits of the rocket equation. You can compare this to having to carry all the water you will drink and all the provisions you will eat along the way in a heavy backpack in one go, while setting out on a desert trek that will last for weeks. That pressure on your back will make you unable to take a step after a while. Without regenerative closed-loop systems that flawlessly recycle water and air, transporting this biological mass needed by a crew of only 6 people for months is not sustainable with current rocket technology. Being a direct death machine for the human body, this environment pushed colonization beyond the limits even when calculated solely through orbital mechanics and basic life support systems. Yet, engineers in space agencies were certain that they could somehow overcome the lack of atmosphere, the communication delay, and the radiation with technology. The common belief was that once these obstacles were overcome, the remaining red soil would offer a silent, neutral, and safe ground suitable for agriculture. Most people were led to believe that this lifeless sandfield only needed water, and that a protective and peaceful geological silence lay in the planet's past. That is, until the probes and orbiters landing on the surface looked into the deepest places of the planet. How would those first realistic observational data, falling into those flawlessly functioning mathematical models, shatter all these optimistic assumptions in a single move? When you go out into the garden of your house and take a handful of soil in your hand, you see an unlimited potential for life waiting only for water and a simple seed within that brown texture. In our minds, soil has always been the most silent symbol of abundance, trust, and growth. However, interplanetary engineering does not proceed with this simple and common-sense logic we have established on Earth. The universe loves to shatter those optimistic assumptions we trust so much with its own ruthless thermodynamic rules in seconds. Humanity's dream of farming on another planet was destroyed by crashing into a microscopic trap. For many years, it was thought that the boundless red sand on the Martian surface was a volcanic, crumbled, dry, and innocent ground. Scientists sincerely believed that plants could easily be grown on this ground when a little water and fertilizer were added. In 2008, the Phoenix lander of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration landed on the surface. When the teams of principal investigators Michael Hecht and William Boynton took the soil and analysed it in special ovens, a frightening chemical residue was found at a rate of 0.6% by mass. The soil was definitely not neutral. It was full of perchlorate salts, which are a strong oxidant poison that paralyzes the human thyroid gland. This toxic compound, which should never have been there, turned that innocent sand into a poison repository. The dream of organic farming collapsed. To grow plants, heavy chemical washing facilities were now needed. There is a problem here. Not only the sand on the surface, but also the geological history in the depths of the planet was deceiving us. Until the late 20th century, all textbooks wrote the same thing. Mars was a cold and lifeless stone, geologically dead since the beginning of the solar system, with no magnetic shield. Orbiting in 1997, the Mars Global Surveyor spacecraft of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration changed everything. When researcher Mario Acuor-Satsanze and his team looked at the old cratered rocks in the southern hemisphere, they encountered shocking data. High-intensity anomalies stretching exactly like they do on our ocean floors on Earth were measured. These invisible stripes were fossilized magnetic traces. The planet had not been dead from the beginning. On the contrary, it once possessed a rotating liquid core and a strong shield system just like Earth. However, the core cooled down, the shield suddenly shut down, and solar winds scraped the entire atmosphere into space. The planet was not actually born dead. It fell victim to a cosmic murder billions of years ago. Deadly crises lay not only in the past, but also in the heart of our own ships. Trusting the reactor logic on Earth, engineers thought the way to protect against galactic radiation was very simple. It was thought that the thicker the metal walls of the ship were built, the better the astronauts would be protected, and an insurmountable armor would be created. Collision experiments at the Space Radiation Laboratory of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration shattered this unshakable belief. Heavy cosmic particles moving close to the speed of light did not stop when they hit those thick aluminium walls. On the contrary, a physical fragmentation chain called spallation in the scientific world was triggered. Striking the metal violently, the cosmic ray tore apart the armor's own atoms and rained deadly secondary neutron shrapnels inside the ship. Instead of protecting the astronaut, the thick metal wall had turned into a radiation weapon that personally struck them. The shield we trusted the most became our most ruthless enemy. But what is truly bizarre is this. While our state-of-the-art machines were collapsing from the inside, the weather outside was also turning all the meteorological laws we knew upside down. For a long time, climatologists thought that Martian storms were short weather events that were local, lasted only a few days, and died down within their own borders, exactly like the desert winds on Earth. That giant storm that silenced the Opportunity rover forever in 2018 wiped out all predictions. Despite only 1% density of the atmosphere, while wind speeds exceeded 150 km per hour, those extremely thin dust particles began to absorb the solar heat at a staggering speed. The warming air pulled more dust upwards, and this thermodynamic death cycle did not stop. This self-feeding chaotic system turned a regional storm not just on a single continent, but into a global apocalypse that engulfed the entire planet, blocking the sun for months. This uncontrolled energy explosion of nature proved that the red climate could never be tamed. All these historical and ruthless discoveries were very harsh slaps thrown at optimistic space agencies that thought Mars was a safe haven. It had been proven that the soil was a toxic field of death. It was revealed that the armors of our ships had personally turned into radiation weapons instead of protecting the astronauts, and meteorological laws had succumbed to those storms, blinding the entire planet. Humanity was tragically learning that it could never solve the rules of the universe with its own Earth-centric common sense. While we were facing the fragility of the thick metal armors we produced ourselves, another much more defenseless, much more invaluable system was about to collapse in the most silent corner of space. In those closed rooms of a long space flights that we thought were sterile and safe, how would that flawless biological network inside the human body silently start a rebellion? Without waiting for a cosmic bullet coming from the outside, those ancient firewalls etched deep within our very genetics were silently failing. Those long, closed, weightless journeys lasting for months were not only weakening our skeleton, but also producing brand new syndromes never seen before in medical literature, trapping us within our own senses and mind. Just as much as the mechanical equipment worth hundreds of millions of dollars, our own anatomy science calibrated according to Earth was also remaining helpless in the face of this environment. Imagine you have embarked on that long journey towards Mars. Had you ever calculated that you could personally lose your own eyes while going to watch the deep darkness of the universe? For a long time, it was thought that the effect of a zero-gravity environment on humans consisted only of losing bone or muscle tissue, and that these could be repaired with sports upon returning to Earth. The vision complaints of astronauts were seen as temporary signs of fatigue. In 2011, when the National Aeronautics and Space Administration researcher Thomas Marder scanned the skulls of crews returning from orbital missions, he made a shocking diagnosis for the medical world. This condition entered the official literature as spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. The problem was not temporary fatigue. When gravity was lifted, the cerebrospinal fluid that normally should stay in the lower part of the body was rushing uncontrollably into the skull. This fluid was applying intense pressure to the back of the eyeball, crushing the eye from the inside and destroying the optic nerves, exactly like pressing on a thin balloon filled to the brim with water with a heavy press machine. This damage, leading up to the permanent loss of vision, struck space medicine deeply. But what about those who are completely healthy? They too were becoming victims of their own minds inside a closed box. For decades, it was thought that meticulously selected, highly educated scientists would work in peace and harmony for a common noble cause. it was believed that disciplined crews would never fall out with each other in a closed habitat. With the Biosphere 2 experiment initiated in 1991 and the third quarter phenomenon defined by Robert Bechtel in his Antarctic winter research, it was proven that the situation was not like that at all. Under the stress of decreasing oxygen and limited resources, the trained crew of 8 people in the experiment quickly divided into hostile tribes. Just like panicking strangers trapped in a small leaky rowboat in the middle of the sea, towards the end of the experiment, these groups even refused to make eye contact and severed communication entirely. Furthermore, that temporary feeling of relief experienced when 3/4 of the mission was over suddenly turned into severe depression when the weight of the return journey was realized. It had been tragically proven how fragile the human social structure is under absolute isolation. The enemy was not only the crewmates behind closed doors, but our own past lying in ambush inside the cells. It was known that space conditions weakened the immune system, but it was thought that the astronaut would remain safe in the sterile ship, as long as a new germ did not come from the outside. After all, that isolated spacecraft could not be infected with a disease from the outside. The comprehensive research published in 2019 by Satish Mehta and his team from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration destroyed this illusion of sterile safety. No matter how sterile the ship was, cosmic radiation and chronic flight stress were collapsing the immune walls. Just like a spy who blends into civilian life and sleeps for years, waking up with a single encrypted message to sabotage the city, the hidden viruses lying in ambush in a person's own body since childhood, especially the herpes and shingles viruses, were reawakening. Even if no attack came from the outside, space travelers were being shot from within. That closed spaceship you thought was so safe was leaving astronauts alone with a reawakened biological ticking bomb. All these medical, psychological, and planetary crises had built a ruthless and invisible wall that left humans helpless in the darkness of space. Going to Mars had stopped being a hardware race about how far you could launch rockets. It had turned into a massive biomedical equation about how you would stop your blood from boiling, your genetics from fragmenting, and your mind from destroying itself in those dark corridors. Yet against all this collapse, our engineering and our will to survive had no intention of giving up. If the planet's extremely thin atmosphere wanted to destroy us in seconds, then humanity had to rewrite the fundamental chemistry of the universe in its own favour. We needed to transform the air poisoning us into a breathable source of life, and that arid and icy desert into a methane fuel repository that would bring us back to Earth. But how exactly did this modern alchemy, creating oxygen and rocket fuel out of nowhere in the middle of that absolute nothingness, millions of kilometers away from Earth, work? To be honest, the idea of recreating breath, water and rocket fire quite literally from scratch in that dark and freezing void, using only invisible and toxic gases when there are no organic resources around us, has always seemed like inexplicable black magic to me. In the most desperate moments, you look at those ruthless equations of physics and think this is impossible. However, this alchemy is not a supernatural magic, but directly the rebuilding of chemical bonds in their most fundamental and elegant form. For our future oxygen needs, it is essential that we break down the abundant carbon dioxide in the Martian atmosphere. This process operates with a method called solid oxide electrolysis. You can compare this to a precise mechanical piggy bank system that separates coins of different sizes according to their slots. The system absorbs the planet's 95% toxic carbon dioxide gas, pressurizes it with a compressor, and heats it up to a high temperature such as 800 degrees Celsius. Under this extreme heat, carbon dioxide molecules decompose into carbon monoxide and singular oxygen ions. This broken down gas is passed through a zirconium-based ceramic catalyst membrane. Exactly like that piggy bank, this ceramic membrane allows only negatively charged oxygen ions to leak through the narrow holes, while it pushes other waste gases out. The lonely oxygen ions that manage to cross to the other side collide with each other, form a bond, and turn into a diatomic pure oxygen molecule that we can breathe. The waste carbon monoxide is released into the atmosphere. This elegant molecular extraction makes that vital production line enabling us to breathe on a foreign world possible, and completely eliminates the necessity of transporting tanks full of heavy air from Earth. After solving breathing, we need to produce tens of thousands of kilograms of rocket fuel from that arid desert to return to Earth. Here, another chemical mechanism called the Sabatier reaction comes into play. You can compare this operation to forcibly dismantling Lego pieces of different colours stuck tightly to each other first, and then reassembling them in a different order to make a brand new vehicle. In the first stage, the carbon dioxide absorbed from the surface and the hydrogen gas obtained from electrolysis are taken into a reactor chamber containing a nickel catalyst. The system provokes this chamber at a temperature of exactly 400 degrees Celsius, allowing the molecular bonds to break. The carbon atom in the carbon dioxide abandons the oxygens, tightly embraces the hydrogen, and turns into methane gas, which is a strong propellant. The exposed oxygens combine with hydrogen and form pure liquid water. While the produced water is liquefied and sent for recycling, the obtained methane is pumped into fuel tanks. This skillful disassemble and reassemble process makes it possible for us to establish an autonomous petrol station on Mars. Finding the rocket fuel we will produce and water, which is the most critical raw material needed for our survival, requires being able to see kilometers below that red beach. Satellites in orbit use electromagnetic echoes and the logic of the dielectric constant to map underground lakes. This mechanism is very similar to a bat that sends sound waves and listens to the echo, bouncing off hard rocks to find its way in a pitch-black cave. So, the radar satellite launches low-frequency electromagnetic waves towards the surface of the planet. Passing through dry soil and basalt rocks, these waves reflect very weakly because the dielectric constant of these inorganic substances is quite low. Conversely, the moment the electromagnetic wave hits a liquid water lake or a dense ice layer very deep below the surface, things change. The high dielectric constant of water suddenly shines that invisible wave like a mirror and throws it directly back to the satellite's antenna. Calculating the round-trip time of this wave with a precise stopwatch, the sensors reveal the topography of the liquid reserves hidden in the planet's dark bowels with mind-boggling precision. So while these technological marvels conquer the ruthless environment outside, by what mechanism does our own biology collapse inside? That famous bone loss of low gravity begins with the breaking of the microscopic communication cycle in the skeletal system called mechanotransduction. Human bone is not a lifeless pole. It is a giant construction site constantly working between bone-building cells called osteoblasts and cells tearing down old bone called osteoclasts. You can compare this situation to blind construction workers who stop building new walls when materials do not arrive, but continue to tear down the old walls with a sledgehammer. While walking on Earth, with your every step your bone flexes, the fluid inside it moves, and this pressure sends that building order to the osteocyte cells. However, in the weak gravity of Mars, because that vital mechanical load is not placed, the osteocytes sink into silence. The building signal is cut like a knife, but the demolition cells ruthlessly continue their task. This disconnection in biological communication causes the bone tissue to become spongy at the microscopic level, and the calcium to mix with the urine, weakening the astronaut from the inside. All these flawless and ruthless mechanisms show how the most fundamental rules of the universe work sometimes to keep us alive, and sometimes to destroy us directly. Those thermodynamic operations producing oxygen and methane by breaking molecular bonds, and those cellular crises melting our skeleton by failing to detect the mechanical pressure inside us, are actually two different faces of the same physical reality. Solving these microscopic and electromagnetic laws on paper is a wonderful scientific achievement. But the real great test begins at the moment of taking these theories out of being a theoretical laboratory experiment and transforming them into massive devices that will directly save human lives. So how do all these oxygen extracting and atom smashing mechanisms step out of the abstract equations on the engineers' desks and turn into a real and noisy technology working in those red deserts? These elegant chemical equations on paper must appear before us as heavy and concrete piles of steel when we leave the safe borders of Earth and step into that deep and freezing darkness. Now, the real issue is solving a much more urgent and deadly crisis than just producing oxygen and water on the surface. The question of how we will cross the human body alive in the fastest way through that transit void of space, filled with cosmic bullets, sits at the center of all projects. The cumbersome and chemical combustion-based mechanism of traditional rockets is physically insufficient for you to quickly reach a distant target like Mars. Therefore, engineers had to develop a brand new hardware to bend orbital mechanics: nuclear thermal propulsion. This technology uses the unstoppable energy of nuclear fission directly instead of fire and chemical explosion. At the center of the system lies a small but extremely dense fission reactor. Liquid hydrogen waiting in freezing cold in the rocket's tanks is passed through the core of this active nuclear reactor. The uranium at the center of the reactor breaks apart to produce extreme heat and instantly expands that liquid hydrogen by turning it into gas. This scorching gas sprays from the rocket's exhaust with such violent pressure that it creates a continuous thrust force that chemical rockets can never reach. Without using a traditional fire burning brightly in space, this hardware hurls heavy spaceships forward in the interplanetary void with a much higher acceleration solely by violently expanding atoms with core heat. This science fiction dream has ceased to be an illusion today and has literally taken on flesh and bone. This great breakthrough became a reality under the umbrella of the Draco project, run jointly by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, that is, DARPA. In January 2025, a very critical threshold was crossed at the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center, watched with bated breath by the worlds of medicine, physics, and engineering. In this historic test, the nuclear fuel managed to endure without melting and fragmenting its own structure in a scorching temperature environment of exactly 2,600 degrees Kelvin within that freezing hydrogen gas surrounding it. This thermal endurance success was the greatest proof that a calculation remaining only on paper had transformed directly into working hardware. Following all this intense development process, as of August 2026, Draco officially passed into that historic orbital test stage, involving the firing of the first nuclear fission propulsion in space. So how does this engineering victory rewrite the fate of an ordinary human inside that dark ship? Draco's accelerated propulsion system acts as a time shield that directly saves the lives of astronauts. On traditional chemical rocket journeys lasting 6 to 9 months, an astronaut inside the spacecraft becomes the target of incessantly raining galactic cosmic rays. Having their cells torn apart, DNA chains broken, and neural networks in their brain damaged during those long months, a space traveler faces the risk of already losing their cognitive abilities and experiencing severe neurological crises by the time they reach Mars. Nuclear thermal propulsion steps in at exactly this point and radically shortens that deadly transit time. Because the ship goes faster, the time the astronaut spends under that nuclear storm is cut like a knife. That astronaut, whom a family is waiting to return to Earth, protects their biological integrity by being exposed to less radiation. This technology directly saves the human mind and its future. The most critical and indisputable figure determining the fate of this technology is that value of 2,600 degrees Kelvin verified in the laboratory. This is not just a high number. It is the ultimate measure of how two different physical worlds, namely nuclear fission producing extreme heat and freezing cold hydrogen, can be held together without destroying each other. While the uranium core burns inside with an energy resembling the surface of the sun, the liquid hydrogen passing right next to it pushes that heat out with a freezing cold of minus hundreds of degrees. The orbital tests in 2026 will definitively verify how this thermal stress of 2,600 Kelvin will affect the machine under the vacuum in the void of space. Almost doubling the thrust force of traditional chemical systems, this thermal efficiency value redefines the speed limit of the interplanetary highway. This hard numerical victory of engineering saves Martian colonization from waiting for a century and puts it on a near and concrete schedule. All these thermal propulsion engines, oxygen-producing mechanical lungs, and underground-looking satellites are a proud story of resistance that the human mind wages against that ruthless darkness of the universe. No matter how advanced they are, these rockets and reactors we have developed do nothing but push the limits of our dependence on Earth. However, while boasting of that nuclear fire we created in our own laboratories, we often forget that perspective that freezes our insides when we raise our heads and look at the real dimensions of space. While discussing how tremendous the technology you produced is, the real big picture is the mind-boggling vastness of the universal ocean in which those systems float. Now is the time to break entirely away from the safe calculations of Earth and face that freezing mathematics of the universe. To understand that the idea of stepping on Mars is not only an engineering problem, but also a cosmic picture of terror, we need to look at those ruthless distances standing before us at their true scales. Centuries ago, Magellan's crew sailing into those dark waters of the Pacific Ocean had no mathematical proof that the journey would end while looking at those endless seas. They were merely busy not dying of hunger or sinking the wooden hull of their ship. However, those dangerous waters struggled with by those desperate sailors remain only a simple puddle next to the physical scales of space. Modern engineering has now stepped out of our planet's oceans and arrived at the edge of a brand new abyss pushing the limits of the human mind. The abyss between the atmospheric pressure of Mars and the harshest natural conditions of Earth is a complete engineering nightmare. Knowing the external pressure an astronaut will be exposed to when designing a spacesuit is of vital importance, otherwise blood boils in seconds. You can compare this situation to having only a tissue paper as material in your hand, while trying to build a steel capsule that will withstand the crushing pressure thousands of meters under the sea. The numbers are unforgiving. An average afternoon atmospheric pressure on the Martian surface is exactly 55 times lower than the pressure at the summit of Mount Everest, which is the most airless and deadly point on Earth. This very ratio directly proves how distant and alien those red deserts we Exactly like that piggy bank, this ceramic membrane allows only negatively charged oxygen ions to leak through the narrow holes, while it pushes other waste gases out. The lonely oxygen ions that manage to cross to the other side collide with each other, form a bond, and turn into a diatomic pure oxygen molecule that we can breathe. The waste carbon monoxide is released into the atmosphere. This elegant molecular extraction makes that vital production line enabling us to breathe on a foreign world possible, and completely eliminates the necessity of transporting tanks full of heavy air from Earth. After solving breathing, we need to produce tens of thousands of kilograms of rocket fuel from that arid desert to return to Earth. Here, another chemical mechanism called the Sabatier reaction comes into play. You can compare this operation to forcibly dismantling Lego pieces of different colours stuck tightly to each other first, and then reassembling them in a different order to make a brand new vehicle. In the first stage, the carbon dioxide absorbed from the surface and the hydrogen gas obtained from electrolysis are taken into a reactor chamber containing a nickel catalyst. The system provokes this chamber at a temperature of exactly 400 degrees Celsius, allowing the molecular bonds to break. The carbon atom in the carbon dioxide abandons the oxygens, tightly embraces the hydrogen, and turns into methane gas, which is a strong propellant. The exposed oxygens combine with hydrogen and form pure liquid water. While the produced water is liquefied and sent for recycling, the obtained methane is pumped into fuel tanks. This skillful disassemble and reassemble process makes it possible for us to establish an autonomous petrol station on Mars. Finding the rocket fuel we will produce and water, which is the most critical raw material needed for our survival, requires being able to see kilometers below that red beach. Satellites in orbit use electromagnetic echoes and the logic of the dielectric constant to map underground lakes. This mechanism is very similar to a bat that sends sound waves and listens to the echo, bouncing off hard rocks to find its way in a pitch-black cave. So, the radar satellite launches low-frequency electromagnetic waves towards the surface of the planet. Passing through dry soil and basalt rocks, these waves reflect very weakly because the dielectric constant of these inorganic substances is quite low. Conversely, the moment the electromagnetic wave hits a liquid water lake or a dense ice layer very deep below the surface, things change. The high dielectric constant of water suddenly shines that invisible wave like a mirror and throws it directly back to the satellite's antenna. Calculating the round-trip time of this wave with a precise stopwatch, the sensors reveal the topography of the liquid reserves hidden in the planet's dark bowels with mind-boggling precision. So while these technological marvels conquer the ruthless environment outside, by what mechanism does our own biology collapse inside? That famous bone loss of low gravity begins with the breaking of the microscopic communication cycle in the skeletal system called mechanotransduction. Human bone is not a lifeless pole. It is a giant construction site constantly working between bone-building cells called osteoblasts and cells tearing down old bone called osteoclasts. You can compare this situation to blind construction workers who stop building new walls when materials do not arrive, but continue to tear down the old walls with a sledgehammer. While walking on Earth, with your every step your bone flexes, the fluid inside it moves, and this pressure sends that building order to the osteocyte cells. However, in the weak gravity of Mars, because that vital mechanical load is not placed, the osteocytes sink into silence. The building signal is cut like a knife, but the demolition cells ruthlessly continue their task. This disconnection in biological communication causes the bone tissue to become spongy at the microscopic level, and the calcium to mix with the urine, weakening the astronaut from the inside. All these flawless and ruthless mechanisms show how the most fundamental rules of the universe work sometimes to keep us alive, and sometimes to destroy us directly. Those thermodynamic operations producing oxygen and methane by breaking molecular bonds, and those cellular crises melting our skeleton by failing to detect the mechanical pressure inside us, are actually two different faces of the same physical reality. Solving these microscopic and electromagnetic laws on paper is a wonderful scientific achievement. But the real great test begins at the moment of taking these theories out of being a theoretical laboratory experiment and transforming them into massive devices that will directly save human lives. So how do all these oxygen-extracting and atom-smashing mechanisms step out of the abstract equations on the engineers' desks and turn into a real and noisy technology working in those red deserts? These elegant chemical equations on paper must appear before us as heavy and concrete piles of steel when we leave the safe borders of Earth and step into that deep and freezing darkness. Now the real issue is solving a much more urgent and deadly crisis than just producing oxygen and water on the surface. The question of how we will cross the human body alive in the fastest way through that transit void of space, filled with cosmic bullets, sits at the center of all projects. The cumbersome and chemical combustion-based mechanism of traditional rockets is physically insufficient for you to quickly reach a distant target like Mars. Therefore, engineers had to develop a brand new hardware to bend orbital mechanics, nuclear thermal propulsion. This technology uses the unstoppable energy of nuclear fission directly instead of fire and chemical explosion. At the center of the system lies a small but extremely dense fission reactor. Liquid hydrogen waiting in freezing cold in the rocket's tanks is passed through the core of this active nuclear reactor. The uranium at the center of the reactor breaks apart to produce extreme heat and instantly expands that liquid hydrogen by turning it into gas. This scorching gas sprays from the rocket's exhaust with such violent pressure that it creates a continuous thrust force that chemical rockets can never reach. Without using a traditional fire burning brightly in space, this hardware hurls heavy spaceships forward in the interplanetary void with a much higher acceleration solely by violently expanding atoms with core heat. This science fiction dream has ceased to be an illusion today and has literally taken on flesh and bone. This great breakthrough became a reality under the umbrella of the Draco project, run jointly by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, that is, DARPA. In January 2025, a very critical threshold was crossed at the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center, watched with bated breath by the worlds of medicine, physics, and engineering. In this historic test, the nuclear fuel managed to endure without melting and fragmenting its own structure in a scorching temperature environment of exactly 2,600 degrees Kelvin within that freezing hydrogen gas surrounding it. This thermal endurance success was the greatest proof that a calculation remaining only on paper had transformed directly into working hardware. Following all this intense development process, as of August 2026, Draco officially passed into that historic orbital test stage, involving the firing of the first nuclear fission propulsion in space. So how does this engineering victory rewrite the fate of an ordinary human inside that dark ship? Draco's accelerated propulsion system acts as a time shield that directly saves the lives of astronauts. On traditional chemical rocket journeys lasting 6 to 9 months, an astronaut inside the spacecraft becomes the target of incessantly raining galactic cosmic rays. Having their cells torn apart, DNA chains broken, and neural networks in their brain damaged during those long months, a space traveler faces the risk of already losing their cognitive abilities and experiencing severe neurological crises by the time they reach Mars. Nuclear thermal propulsion steps in at exactly this point and radically shortens that deadly transit time. Because the ship goes faster, the time the astronaut spends under that nuclear storm is cut like a knife. That astronaut, whom a family is waiting to return to Earth, protects their biological integrity by being exposed to less radiation. This technology directly saves the human mind and its future. The most critical and indisputable figure determining the fate of this technology is that value of 2,600 degrees Kelvin verified in the laboratory. This is not just a high number. It is the ultimate measure of how two different physical worlds, namely nuclear fission producing extreme heat and freezing cold hydrogen, can be held together without destroying each other. While the uranium core burns inside with an energy resembling the surface of the sun, the liquid hydrogen passing right next to it pushes that heat out with a freezing cold of minus hundreds of degrees. The orbital tests in 2026 will definitively verify how this thermal stress of 2,600 Kelvin will affect the machine under the vacuum in the void of space. Almost doubling the thrust force of traditional chemical systems, this thermal efficiency value redefines the speed limit of the interplanetary highway. This hard numerical victory of engineering saves Martian colonization from waiting for a century and puts it on a near and concrete schedule. All these thermal propulsion engines, oxygen-producing mechanical lungs, and underground-looking satellites are a proud story of resistance that the human mind wages against that ruthless darkness of the universe. No matter how advanced they are, these rockets and reactors we have developed do nothing but push the limits of our dependence on Earth. However, while boasting of that nuclear fire we created in our own laboratories, we often forget that perspective that freezes our insides when we raise our heads and look at the real dimensions of space. While discussing how tremendous the technology you produced is, the real big picture is the mind-boggling vastness of the universal ocean in which those systems float. Now is the time to break entirely away from the safe calculations of Earth and face that freezing mathematics of the universe. To understand that the idea of stepping on Mars is not only an engineering problem, but also a cosmic picture of terror, we need to look at those ruthless distances standing before us at their true scales. Centuries ago, Magellan's crew sailing into those dark waters of the Pacific Ocean had no mathematical proof that the journey would end while looking at those endless seas. They were merely busy not dying of hunger or sinking the wooden hull of their ship. However, those dangerous waters struggled with by those desperate sailors remain only a simple puddle next to the physical scales of space. Modern engineering has now stepped out of our planet's oceans and arrived at the edge of a brand new abyss pushing the limits of the human mind. The abyss between the atmospheric pressure of Mars and the harshest natural conditions of Earth is a complete engineering nightmare. Knowing the external pressure an astronaut will be exposed to when designing a spacesuit is of vital importance, otherwise blood boils in seconds. You can compare this situation to having only a tissue paper as material in your hand, while trying to build a steel capsule that will withstand the crushing pressure thousands of meters under the sea. The numbers are unforgiving. An average afternoon atmospheric pressure on the Martian surface is exactly 55 times lower than the pressure at the summit of Mount Everest, which is the most airless and deadly point on Earth. This very ratio directly proves how distant and alien those red deserts we hope to tame are even from the most ruthless summits of Earth. The second great destruction lies in the inequality between the capacity of the cellular shields protecting human genetics and that invisible cosmic radiation raining down on the planet's surface. A colonist's chance of survival is directly related to the dose of ionizing rays ruthlessly piercing their cells. You can compare this danger to having to walk for hours right in the middle of a front line where warplanes incessantly rain down heavy bombs from the sky, wearing only a very thin raincoat. The data is staggering. The radiation dose an astronaut standing unprotected on the Martian surface, despite that thin atmosphere, would receive in a single day is exactly 5 times higher than the annual legal radiation limit of a strictly supervised nuclear power plant worker on Earth. This very ratio proves why the dream of roaming freely on the surface is impossible, and that those lands are no different from a giant death pit. The third crisis is the deep economic abyss between the cost of transporting materials to Mars and the commercial logistics systems on Earth. Sending every sip of water or medicine we need from Earth when we arrive there remains subject to the constraints of the rocket equation. You can compare this difficulty to having to build a brand new city worth billions of dollars from scratch, just to be able to buy a loaf of bread from the bakery in the next neighborhood. The facts of physics are clear. Due to orbital mechanics, the current rocket launch cost of sending 1 kilogram of cargo from Earth to a settlement on Mars is exactly 5,000 times more expensive than sending the same 1 kilogram of cargo on Earth by intercontinental aeroplane. This very ratio ruthlessly documents why an interplanetary supply chain is doomed to collapse, and that exploiting the planet's own resources is an absolute necessity to survive. The fourth shockwave is that bottomless power difference between our own technological production capacity and the energy contained in deep space. Although the human body seems safe in the ship, the void outside swarms with heavy and charged atomic nuclei tearing our cells apart. You can compare this physical pressure to a violent hurricane that has suddenly gone out of control, hitting with all its power onto a very thin piece of sticky tape you use to hold the roof of your house. The scale of our helplessness is mind-boggling. The kinetic energy carried by galactic cosmic rays filling deep space is exactly millions of times greater than the maximum particle energy produced by the Large Hadron Collider, the most powerful machine humanity has ever built. This very ratio reveals how weak even our most advanced technology remains on a universal scale, and what a fragile target human genetics is in the face of that cosmic storm. The fifth crisis is the tragic inadequacy of our most advanced survival systems in the face of our biological needs. Although breaking the planet's toxic atmosphere and obtaining oxygen is presented as an engineering miracle, the constant breathing demand of our biology crushes these machines. You can compare this situation to the tragedy of a desperate firefighter trying to carry water with a small teaspoon in their hand to extinguish a 5-story apartment building on fire. Devices cannot keep up with our bodies. The amount of oxygen the MOXIE device, developed by the space agency with a budget of billions of dollars, produces per hour by operating at maximum capacity is exactly 3 to 4 times less than the amount of oxygen a single adult human needs while just lying down and resting without exerting any effort. This very ratio strikes us in the face with how primitive a stage our plans to establish a civilization in space still are, and that mere survival alone requires a production infrastructure difficult to overcome on that planet. These 5 physical walls standing before us prove how the universe crushes us with our own mechanical inadequacies. However, when we set aside the rockets and devices, the destructive dynamics within the Martian climate itself are much harsher. That ruthless and wild nature in the depths of space has not played its real trump card yet. The greatest technological collapses are just beginning. Humanity's potential collapse in that dark space stems not only from the biological inadequacy of the machines we built in laboratories, but directly from the unshakable violence of the sky and the soil themselves. When you look at the extremely thin air and rusty sand of the surface from the outside, you fall into that famous deadly illusion by thinking the nature there is static and docile. However, every dust particle and every temperature change on the surface is personally calibrated to erode all our hardware from the inside. The sixth crisis is the thermal cycle violence that emerges due to the planet's inability to retain its own heat. That extreme heat difference between day and night in an environment forces the plastic and metal parts of the spaceship to constantly expand and contract, leading to structural fatigue cracks. You can compare this mechanical torment to suddenly pouring boiling water onto the windscreen of a car frozen in -degrees in winter to immediately thaw the ice. That glass shatters into pieces in seconds with a sudden expansion on its surface. The abyss in the data is terrifying. That ruthless day and night temperature difference experienced on a summer day at the equator on Mars is exactly 3 times more violent than the daily temperature difference in a scorching desert on Earth. This very ratio documents why even the strongest engineering alloys crack on the surface, and that the planet is actually a ruthless metal grinder. The seventh obstacle is the sunlight inequality in energy harvesting, which is the lifeblood of civilization. As the interplanetary distance increases, the density of photons hitting solar panels rapidly decreases according to the inverse square law, which is a physical rule. You can compare this dramatic darkness to dismantling the powerful floodlight system set up to illuminate a large football stadium and trying to illuminate the entire pitch with only a weak flashlight. The calculations of physics are never wrong. Due to that darkness created by the physical distance of Mars to the Sun, the total sunlight density reaching the surface is exactly 43% of the life-giving solar energy hitting the Earth's surface. This very ratio strikes us in the face with why those expensive solar panel fields will turn into unproductive dead investments there, and that no device can be operated without nuclear reactors. The eighth danger is hidden in the microscopic scales of that sneaky enemy leaking into the machines. Those abrasive red dusts carried by Martian winds act as sandpaper that files down the sealing gaskets, moving joints and sensitive lenses of spacecraft from the inside. You can compare this abrasion process to sprinkling hard iron dusts that scrape the gears every time they operate between the harmonious and smooth mechanism of the gears in a watch. The geological picture before us is harsh. The size of the dust particles turning the Martian regolith and those storms into a disaster is exactly 60 times thinner than an average desert sand on Earth, or the extremely thin talcum powder used on babies. This very ratio proves how even the most flawless isolation walls designed will be breached defenselessly against that microscopic enemy, and that every machine will suffocate from the inside over time. The ninth and final shock is the scale of the transit radiation damage we take on that road before even stepping foot on the planet. The total dose of those particles piercing the armor of the ship just during the flight is at a level that will permanently mutate human genetics. You can compare this biological destruction to being hit on your head with a heavy sledgehammer on the operating table to sleep, instead of receiving a safe anesthetic at the hospital. The physiological price the body pays is frightening. The total radiation dose a human will be exposed to in a deep space journey embarked upon with current technology is exactly 4.2 times higher than a 6-month mission spent in the International Space Station within Earth's protective shield. This very ratio clearly shows directly that what is truly deadly is not stepping on Mars, but being able to survive that dark abyss in the freezing void without taking brain damage. All these thermal destructions, microscopic dust attacks, radiation doses leaving us helpless, and insurmountable distances are ruthless wars declared against human biology. However, even these measurable and proven exact figures in our hands are only the visible parts of the greatest disasters we will experience. The universe hides its real deadly blows in the shadow of those tremendous unknowns that we cannot yet measure, that we cannot prove in laboratories. The greatest irony of science is this: as technology advances, the borders of what we do not know do not narrow. On the contrary, a much darker, deeper, and insurmountable horizon of ignorance opens up. All those rocket equations, autonomous systems, and those precise engineering data we have obtained on paper so far are actually simple metallic keys used only to bring us to the door of the real unanswered questions. When you crack open that heavy door, what stands before you is not a measurable physics problem, but a striking biomedical abyss full of contradictions that could reduce humanity's chance of survival to 0 in seconds. The brightest devices in our hands are inevitably blinded in the face of the universe's darkest secrets. One of the first secrets whose answer we do not know is related to the universal fate of our skeleton itself. It is a ruthless scientific fact that human physiology rapidly melts bone and muscle tissue under zero gravity, that is, in that deep space void or orbital stations. The numbers are constant. It has been definitively proven that calcium dissolves in that weightless environment and mixes into the blood and then the urine. However, as we know, the red planet does not have zero gravity, but a partial gravitational pull that is 38% of Earth's. That massive question leaving the medical world in the dark is this: is this 38% weight sufficient to provide the biological threshold needed to trigger that vital, mechanical stress signal telling our cells to produce bone? Or is this weak force merely a fake and cruel hope that just slightly slows down our biological collapse? If this physiological mystery is solved against us, the resulting consequences will be permanent for generations. If that weak partial acceleration cannot stop the expected cellular bone loss, the skeletons of the colonists settling there will become so weak within a few years that their bodies will never again be able to withstand that heavy gravity of Earth. The return ticket of those who go will burn biologically forever, and our dream of becoming a multiplanetary species will turn into a one-way genetic exile and collapse. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration and the European Space Agency are desperately trying to test this deadly biological threshold in laboratories and space stations with complex orbital centrifuge projects. The second and much more frightening mystery is related to that dark nature of deep space radiation seeping into our minds. It has been proven in laboratory experiments conducted on mice that galactic cosmic rays ruthlessly tear apart the neural networks in the hippocampus region and create an accelerated cellular destruction in the brain. However, the real unknown terror is what kind of a clinical reaction the complex human brain will give to this microscopic nuclear bombardment. Can our brain withstand this? Will that flawless neurological forest in our mind completely dry up and perish under the relentless rain of these heavy particles at the speed of light? I wonder if human intelligence will be able to preserve even its most fundamental identity memories when it remains isolated in that deep darkness for months. Neurobiologists and space physicians led by Charles Lemoley are struggling to understand this dangerous limit. If this medical mystery results against us, the disaster we will face is much more tragic than any technical engine failure. If galactic rays create a cognitive collapse in the human mind within months, when the hatch of the ship opens, those heroic astronauts who managed to reach Mars will have turned into severe dementia patients at a level where they cannot make an emergency decision and cannot even remember their own pasts. That flawless technology worth billions of dollars will turn into a cold coffin that merely tosses encrusted bodies that have lost their minds and stare into the void across interplanetary space, carrying them to a foreign world. Because of this frightening possibility, countless medical research centers on Earth are practically racing against time to find pharmacological shields that will stop cosmic ray dementia at the cellular level. While these dark secrets in our own anatomy and biology have not yet been solved, the real great and chilling terror waits silently in the geological depths of the planet itself. As we forcefully try to adapt our bodies and minds to that barren red surface, those dark underground waters kilometers below the surface sands may harbour a billions of years old, much more disturbing question. Should we actually be thankful that we're all alone in the deep universe? Even though our deep loneliness in the universe often gives us a frightening feeling of isolation, the possibility of encountering a biological thing we do not know and cannot make sense of in that pitch darkness is much more terrifying. For centuries we have looked at the sky and searched for intelligent friends resembling ourselves who could talk to us. However, that freezing silence of the red planet might be hiding only the most primitive and stubborn forms of survival, rather than intelligence. If those unreachable waters beneath the surface have been silently protecting a microscopic secret for billions of years, humanity stepping there will not be an engineering victory, but the beginning of a dark and moral destruction on a universal scale. The third great mystery is underground life and the planetary protection dilemma, one of the darkest nightmares of astrobiology. It is an indisputable fact that the outer surface of Mars is scorched by radiation, absolutely toxic and dead. In addition to this, it has also been definitively proven that massive radars in orbit reflect traces of liquid formations kilometers below the surface. However, the truly controversial detail is the nature of these reflections. Do the reflections in those dark depths consist only of a lifeless clay mud that conducts electric current? Or are we looking at ancient underground lakes that have remained completely isolated from that freezing outer world for billions of years, silently harboring a microbial life highly resistant to salt? Are there things silently breathing in those dark and icy waters, kilometers below our feet? If this biological mystery results against us and native Martian microbes live underground, our going there could trigger a universal tragedy. Because the moment we carry our own resistant bacteria there with our rockets launching from Earth and the boots of astronauts, we would infect and destroy a second biological origin that emerged in the universe independently from us on the very first day we find it. Our own existence could turn into a pollution source that could wipe out an alien tree of life with a single step. Astrobiology institutions and the ExoMars mission of the European Space Agency are striving to examine that dark region without falling into this ethical disaster. The fourth mystery, and the one that divides space science the most, is the origin of the methane gas that appears like a ghost in the atmosphere. The Curiosity rover of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration has proven that it detects distinct methane levels on the surface that increase and decrease in certain seasons, almost resembling a rhythmic breathing. However, the real confusing contradiction begins right in orbit. Although the Trace Gas Orbiter satellite belonging to the European Space Agency scans the entire atmosphere from above with its sensitive sensors, it has not been able to find a trace of this methane at all. The signal comes only from the very bottom of the soil and rapidly disappears above. That critical question dividing the scientific world into two is this: is this gas only the residue of a lifeless geological reaction that hot rocks enter with underground waters? Or is a hidden biological whisper of methanogenic microbes breathing in the depths of the planet, waking up with seasonal temperatures and secreting gas being heard? If this methane is the breath of a biological life, is the red planet making us listen to the survival battle of an organism that has been asleep for billions of years? If the surface is landed upon before this secret is solved, the question of whether there is an ecosystem still actively living in the depths of Mars always remains unanswered. Every water well the colonists dig and every deep cave they enter could create an unexpected and unidentifiable microbial biological contamination danger. Laboratories on Earth are desperately searching whether this invisible whisper is a geological hiccup or a living breath by cross-verifying the surface and orbital spectrum data. These dark biological secrets forcing the human mind, our melting skeletons, and those probable alien microbes underground clearly show how complex and ruthless real universal science is. However, the books we have read for years and the high-budget cinema films we have watched in large halls kept selling us a much more cheerful, simple, and smooth colonization story. So why is there such a deep abyss between those sweet science fiction tales we have been made to believe and the freezing physical facts we are forced to face? Because those rescue operations and heroism stories we have watched on screens for years are built not on the ruthless facts of physics, but on selling tickets at the box office. We have all seen in films that an astronaut easily brings that red planet to its knees with their intelligence. In the cinema, our arrogant belief that humans will conquer the universe was caressed. However, the data coming from laboratories are of no concern to scriptwriters. When we scrape away that romantic Mars dream popular culture tells us, only that ruthless and cold corpse of thermodynamic equations comes out from underneath it. Now it is time to tear down those lies believed by millions of people one by one. The first great lie pumped to society is that we can easily grow plants by mixing a little of our own faeces into those red sands and setting up a greenhouse. We all watch this with great admiration in the heroism scenes of that intelligent botanist left alone in Hollywood films. Contrary to optimistic fiction, it was proven by the Phoenix lander that the Martian regolith lacks vital nitrogen components and is covered with toxic perchlorate salts that instantly burn cells. A significant portion of the soil is full of that oxidant poison paralyzing the human thyroid gland. You cannot even hold that sand with your bare hands. To be able to do agriculture on Mars, you must first establish massive chemical washing facilities to purify the poison in the soil. This is exactly why thinking you will establish an organic garden by throwing a little fertilizer on the surface is no different from hoping to grow tomatoes inside a toxic barrel of cyanide. It is a completely foolish cinema fantasy. The second lie is the illusion that when your helmet cracks in that thin air of Mars, you can survive for a while by holding your breath and running. We have seen this countless times in science fiction films, in those exciting scenes where the hero tightly holds their breath while jumping from one spaceship to another. Medical facts do not allow this heroism. Human biology cannot resist that low pressure by holding breath. The surface pressure is below that critical Armstrong limit, and the physical law called ebullism instantly comes into play. Because the pressure is only 6 millibars despite the freezing cold outside, all the fluids in your body, your tears and your blood start to boil in seconds due to your body heat. The expanding air violently expels itself by tearing your lungs. This is exactly why thinking you will slowly suffocate when your helmet breaks is a dangerous luxury. Your body will tear apart from the inside with the evaporation of your blood and will fail disastrously within 15 seconds. The third myth is the lie that red dust storms harbour winds violent enough to topple space rockets and blow people into the air. Oh, we saw plenty of this in those flashy Hollywood disaster films where astronauts tied themselves with steel ropes so as not to fly, and heavy antennas snapped in the storm. Fluid dynamics rejects this fiction. The thrusting power of a wind to push objects depends strikingly on the physical density of the air, that is, its mass. The atmospheric density of Mars is only 1% of Earth's. Therefore, the thrusting power of that storm blowing at 150 km per hour hitting your face cannot go one step beyond a light spring breeze on Earth. This is exactly why thinking the wind will lift you into the air or topple a heavy rocket proves nothing but the laziness of box office scriptwriters unaware of fundamental physics rules. The fourth funny lie is the myth that the temperature reaches 20 degrees at the Martian equator in summer months, and therefore there is a mild weather where one can walk around outside in thin clothes with an oxygen mask. We read this in illustrations showing the planet like a cheerful holiday resort and in clickbait science headlines. This optimistic perception is based only on momentary data reflecting from the soil at noon. In reality, however, that thin atmosphere can never hold the sun's heat inside. Even if the soil you step on at noon at the equator is 20 degrees, the temperature of the air at chest level remains at -degrees. Furthermore, the second the sun sets, the surface suddenly plummets to -70 degrees. This sudden heat loss experienced is a thermal shock that freezes everything. This is exactly why looking at those sunny photos and thinking spring weather is experienced is a dangerous ignorance that denies that ruthless thermodynamic violence that will freeze your body the moment darkness falls. Of course, the tales popular culture puts us to sleep with are not limited only to soil, air or storms. The real arrogance Hollywood and the media instill in us lies in the lie that thick metal armors will protect us from radiation, and that our only shortcoming is a little more budget. This fake trust we have in our machines and our money hides deadly surprises within itself. Humankind is arrogant enough to believe that those billions of dollars worth of steel piles and technological engineering marvels they have built on Earth can bend the fundamental rules of the universe. That fake feeling of success we have dominating nature on Earth is of no use against that silent, deadly radiation in the depths of space or a person's psychological collapse within themselves. Because when we step out of the safe cradle of Earth and jump into the dark waters of the galaxy, we think that those flawless computers we take with us will practically deify us. However, the rules of Mars are so harsh and ruthless that humans can never buy them with money or heavy metal armors. The shields we trust the most actually turn into weapons, digging our own graves. The fifth popular lie is the illusion that if we cover our spaceship or settlement with very thick metal plates, we can easily be protected from that deadly cosmic radiation. We have seen this countless times in those peaceful scenes of astronauts inside glowing heavy steel armors we see in science fiction, video games, and films. The physical rule called secondary fragmentation dynamics destroys this fake trust. The truth is that when high-energy galactic cosmic rays hit that metal, they never stop. On the contrary, they tear apart the atomic nuclei of that thick metal and rain much more dangerous secondary neutron shrapnels into the living space. The thicker the metal shield you use, the more violent this secondary deadly neutron scattering inside becomes. This is exactly why thinking you will hide behind heavy steel plates and escape radiation is no different from wearing a thick bulletproof vest and personally triggering the ticking bomb inside it with your own hands. It is a rather ironic suicide. The sixth great myth is the lie that the only reason we do not go to Mars is just a lack of political will and budget, and that if trillions of dollars were printed, we could fly there tomorrow morning. We see this every day in the ambitious messages posted by technology billionaires and in those magnificent advertising presentations of giant space companies themed, "We're just waiting for funding." Industrial facts tear this illusion apart, for flawless closed-loop life support systems that will keep humans alive for years in that dark void have not even been invented yet. A technology that will recycle water, toxic air, and waste with 100% efficiency without taking any external support does not currently exist on Earth. Even our advanced space station orbiting today is still dependent on regular cargo supports to be launched from below. This is exactly why thinking you will immediately conquer that planet with unlimited money is as pitiful a delusion as thinking you can buy an aeroplane from scratch in the air with stacks of cash in your pocket while jumping down a deep abyss. The seventh and final myth is the lie that those elite astronauts who have gone through military discipline will flawlessly protect their mental health in narrow and dark isolation lasting for years. We have seen this countless times in those ice-cold, never-giving-up, steel-willed main characters in cinema halls who crack clever jokes in every disaster. However, evolutionary neuroscience rejects this heroism narrative. The human brain has never evolved suitably to be imprisoned and locked in a tiny tin can surrounded by death, millions of kilometers away from Earth. As a matter of fact, the famous Biosphere 2 and isolation simulations conducted on Earth have proven this psychological collapse. Even the trained scientists in those experiments were gripped by severe paranoia within just a few months, despite being right on Earth, became enemies with each other and collapsed cognitively in a striking manner. This is exactly why thinking you will erase millions of years of human social biological codes by giving plenty of tests and training, and believing everyone will turn into a flawless machine in that wild darkness, is a foolish illusion that completely throws the science of psychology in the bin. These ruthless slaps of physics and psychology shattered those fake trust walls we have believed in for years, one by one. The heroes in the films died, our shelters turned into shrapnel traps, and the power of money melted in the void. When all these illusions collapse, only one absolute truth remains. Those flawless and silent ways of wilderness that the planet prepared with its own hands to destroy humans. This is exactly why, when those multi-billion budgets planned on Earth and baseless science fiction tales are set aside, there is only one mathematical truth that the first humans who will step on that planet will face: death. However, this death will not be a heroic or peaceful farewell we are accustomed to on Earth. Those red deserts are full of flawless traps designed to tear human biology apart in seconds, burn cells from the inside, or rip oxygen from veins. So, when our technology fails and that very thin line snaps, how will your body meet the real wilderness there in the very first second? The first death scenario is that absolute betrayal of the pressure shield in seconds. 42 days after the mission, you're taking a simple geological surface walk on the southern slope of the Great Victoria Crater at the equator. In an ordinary step, your foot trips on a rusty red stone, and the front visor of your helmet hits a jagged basalt rock violently. That tiny thin crack appearing in the composite glass causes the ruthless 6 millibars of pressure outside to rapidly rush into the helmet. That second, you feel a very sharp ringing and popping sound in your ears. Then you feel all the fluids under your skin bubbling, your pupils suddenly expanding outwards, and an unbearable expansion pain in your ribcage. Because the pressure suddenly disappears, the biological law of ebullism begins. Despite the freezing -degrees outside, your blood and body fluids instantly turn into gas and boil due to your body heat. The expanding hot steam tears all the alveoli in your lungs from the inside and bursts from your lips as a bloody foam. Your brain remains oxygenless in just 10 seconds and is buried in eternal darkness. Your body has been torn from the inside. Oh, this is exactly the barest proof of how that supreme heroism, will of humans, turns into a helpless pile of flesh in seconds in the face of those silent vacuum rules of physics. The second scenario is acute radiation poisoning, which is a silent and invisible assassin. 184 days after the mission, you're inside a thinly armoured surface vehicle 10 kilometres away from the main shelter in the desolate Vastus Borealis in the northern plains. At an unexpected moment, the early warning system coming from orbital satellites collapses. A giant coronal mass ejection breaking off from the sun directly and ruthlessly hits the planet, which has no magnetic shield. There is no physical explosion, flame, heat, or shockwave around you. You only feel a strange numbness deep inside your cells, an intense metallic taste suddenly appearing in your mouth, and bright white flashes of light exploding one after another in the darkness of your retina. There is no physical pain, only a heavy nausea. However, at that moment, high-energy ionizing radiation particles have pierced through your DNA chains like a microscopic machine gun. Your bone marrow dies in seconds, and your cell's ability to divide permanently stops. During the following 3 ruthless weeks, your hair slowly falls out, your internal organs fail, and bleeding internally, you melt in your bed. This is exactly that cold art of the universe destroying us not with fire, but by rotting us cell by cell with unseen invisible bullets. Physical pressure tearing us apart from the inside in seconds, or those invisible rays coming from the stars silently rotting our genetics, might seem like the most ruthless moves the planet makes against us. However, what is truly destructive is that even if these sudden and violent disasters are not experienced, that toxic soil we personally step on every day, and that artificial air we breathe in the shelters, harbour deadly ticking bombs within themselves. Remember, you do not always need a major accident to die in that red hell. Sometimes the most certain death does not have to be noisy and flashy like an exploding helmet, or that giant firestorm hurling from the sun. Sometimes even that thin red dust leaking from the airlock or the accumulation of our own breath we exhale in the shelter is enough to softly suffocate us. In addition to those destructive astronomical disasters, the red planet also acts almost like a master in silent and slow-moving biochemical murders. Even if you miraculously survive the great destructions outside, those sneaky toxins inside that sterile shelter you built yourself will slowly end your biological clock with no hurry at all. The third scenario is the sneaky revenge of the soil leaking inside that shelter you thought was safe yourself, namely chronic perchlorate poisoning. 920 days after the mission, you're working in the cold botanical laboratory in the southern corridor of the main underground facility, After surface walks done for years, microscopic perchlorate dust sticking to the fabrics of heavy spacesuits and being carried inside and leaking through the ventilation filters have exceeded biological limits in the breathing air inside over time. No warning bell rings. You only feel a constant and painful swelling at the bottom of your neck. Then your heart rhythm slows down, your fingertips constantly turn ice cold, and an indescribable chronic feeling of exhaustion spreads to your bones. That strong oxidant poison in the soil has rapidly mixed into your blood, completely blocking your thyroid gland from taking iodine. Your body's metabolic rate suddenly collapses, cellular energy production stops, and your vital hormones are zeroed. In the following months, while your cells are left airless almost inside themselves and rot, you slowly and helplessly succumb to a heart attack in a deep clouding of consciousness. This is exactly that humiliating art of torture of the planet slowly leaving an astronaut without energy and suffocating them not with explosions or rocket failures, but with simple chemical bonds in its own red dust. The fourth and final scenario is hypercapnia, that is, carbon dioxide suffocation, which is the most silent end machines will make us experience. 630 days after the mission, you are in a deep night's rest in the narrow and windowless sleeping capsule of the temporary research station on the surface. However, while you're sleeping, that complex MOXIE-based oxygen generator or air scrubber filters outside the station have frozen and silently broken down. The alarm system does not work. That hot breath you exhale yourself finishes the limited oxygen in the room and starts to slowly accumulate the heavy carbon dioxide gas up to the ceiling. Just before falling asleep, you feel a mild, dull headache at the nape of your neck and a vague heaviness in your rib cage. The increasing gas ratio gives you a sweet numbness and a striking calmness. There is no panic. That dense carbon dioxide in the blood triggers biological hypercapnia by making the blood pH level acidic. Your acidified cells permanently lose their ability to bind oxygen. Or your brain silently goes into a deep coma state to protect itself in the face of the increasing toxic acid level. While sleeping, your internal organs silently fail one by one from lack of oxygen. You can never open your eyes again. This is exactly that tragic destruction where, after so many great battles waged against those harsh rules of space, a human merely chokes on their own breath and emotionlessly blends into the darkness. From our blood melting from solar storms, to the poison in the soil, to the acid in our own breath, the planet Mars has declared a certain deadly and flawless war on us on every front. All the ruthless data physics, chemistry and biology offer us are now out in the open. What is left is only a final philosophical picture where we must face our own fears and that toughest ultimate decision we must make in the name of being a multiplanetary species. Looking back, this dark mental journey we embarked on today was actually a heavy confrontation, striking us in the face with how fragile and defenseless we are in the face of that freezing greatness of the universe. We felt to our bones that deep disappointment emerging when that endless desire to explore burning inside us collided with the ruthless and silent facts space offers us. Our dream of reaching the stars was tested not only by the constraints of our own biology, but also by the silence of that cold abyss waiting to wipe out our existence.
Yeah.
The real terrifying shock forming the backbone of this journey was that absolute physical scale shock where the planet crushes us not only with a lack of atmosphere, but with an immeasurable power difference. The fact that the machines we created ourselves remain millions of times weaker in the face of those deep energy particles in the universe and turn into pieces of paper actually shows that this technological war has been lost from the start. Watching our bodies tear apart from the inside at the cellular level, or our minds slowly melt in an endless void, was the most staggering discovery that woke us up forever from that flawless universal arrogance. When you two stood at the edge of this abyss and looked over those dark and stormy red sands, you actually saw not a new world we will conquer, but a giant graveyard we never belonged to. Those silent death traps lying beneath that thin atmosphere clearly showed you that our will to survive is limited not by technology, but by the mercy of the universe. From now on, every time you look at the sky, you will never forget the biological and physical terror hiding behind that shining red dot. If these heavy facts have opened a brand new door in your mind, do not forget to like the video and share your thoughts on those cold facts with us in the comments. For humanity to better understand these ruthless limits, immediately share this journey with a friend who loves that uncompromising and bare face of science, and subscribe to our channel. We discuss the physical rules of this dark void, but the real mystery is hidden in that untouchable energy, constantly flowing within that void and drawing the ultimate speed limit of the universe. While everything has a limit, the source of that absolute speed, piercing the darkness, awaits us as a great physical secret. While we set out towards that invisible source, from which corner of the universe, from which city are you currently with us in front of this screen? The new place we will go will be the very heart of that infinite speed that even time is afraid to touch. Today we learned how those freezing and ruthless physical limits of Mars silently crush and run over the human body. However, the real great shock is hidden in the complex quantum mathematics right inside the light that enables us to look at that red planet. Physicists are still debating the universal source of that absolute speed as a great cosmic secret. So, in that dark fabric, where does light get its speed from? If you are ready, we're starting to open the boundaries of space-time.